Bhante. Respect. Good morning. I was just mentioning to Venerable Kusala how last year also it just coincided, excuse me, that one of the talks I gave was on Mother's Day as well. So this year as well. So I think it is an auspicious sign. Mothers, happy Mother's Day. What can you say that is justifiably sufficient, that captures all that we may show in the form of gratitude? It's very hard. It's very difficult to find such, gestures, etc. But we can try, we can strive to find different ways of expressing it. It's interesting because a little bit about a century ago, you probably know the story, there was this woman whose mom had worked to cater to the wounds of both sides of the Civil War, of soldiers. Her daughter eventually ended up fighting for a day in the US that could be designated as Mother's Day. So she fought long and hard just to make sure that comes true, and it did, around 1920s. And but her goal was to get soldiers and just everybody, pretty much, because it was such a predominant fact of the war at the time. So people could sit down and write a note of thank you to their moms. But because we're living in capitalistic times and consumerism, even at those days, Hallmark jumped in. And it started, even in those days, 1920s. They started to say, Mother's Day, why don't you just go ahead and purchase already made, prepared for you cards you can just send to mom. That really, really did not go so well with Anna Jarvis. She's the one who came up with, who fought for the day, for Mother's Day, to be accepted, by Congress and all that. It passed. At one point, she even fought the Red Cross women of, I think there was a major event going on to support the troops. This was right around, the time of World War I, etc. And she fought with these groups of women who were supporting, selling products that would benefit the soldiers and stuff. So her main idea was, why is this becoming such a consumer-driven affair? When what I was after was simply to show this sense of gratitude and love that comes genuinely from an individual directed towards their own mother. So it has that personal touch. So she was an idealist, she was a romantic. And as I was driving here, at the corner of almost every gas station, you would see these teddy bears, balloons, candy, whatever, roses, flowers, which are wonderful, but at the same time it just makes one think about things, and especially when it comes to a day that is so poignantly important as Mother's Day. As far as my own attitude towards it goes, for me every day is a Mother's Day. I try to, make myself open to remember my mother, who passed away years ago. Actually, a few days ago, it was her 25th anniversary of her passing. She died very young. But it's a wonderful thing whenever we have those moments, and it is a celebration of a Mother's Day. Whenever we remember it, their value, their worth. The Buddha was very fortunate to have, well, before he was a Buddha, of course, Mahamaya, and then one of the traditions in the texts, in the suttas, it's mentioned how when a bodhisattva becomes a Buddha, the mother who gave birth to this future Buddha dies within a span of 7 days of sickness. So that's one of the norms, accepted, I guess, I don't know if I can call it fact, but it's definitely mentioned in the Nikayas and the commentaries as one of the signs. But yes, she passed away in physical form. However, her presence was still felt even later on when the Abhidhamma came around. Later, after the third council. But it was interesting how you still see that motherly love even within the Buddha. If you didn't see it within his own character, you also saw it in his teachings and the way he took care of his students. When he was asked later on, okay, when you pass away, is there going to be a designated individual who will be the leader of the Sangha? And one of the biggest schisms that was created at the time was through Devadatta, the Buddha's own brother-in-law, who happened to be Mahamaya's brother, even though in the suttas they're called like his cousin. But when you go back, it's his own brother-in-law. Mahamaya is his own wife, the one who passed away, her brother, who tried to say, hey, you know, we're family, and I've reached certain levels of meditative attainments, absorptions. I think it's time for you to retire. You know, and it's up to me. I'll jump in and I'll put that, you know, burden on my shoulders, and I will carry that. So, and the Buddha just shrugged it off. And he always came back to the Dhamma. One time to Ananda, he turns and says, haven't you been listening? It's the Dhamma. That is all that you need once I'm gone. And when we look at Dhamma for refuge, as long as we're coming not with a critical mind that is so predominantly present here in our 21st century way of thinking, we still see that motherly love in the teachings. You know, the Buddha was seen as the ultimate medicine man, the protector. In Tibetan Buddhism, for example, there's even you know, the additional presence of medicine Buddha, etc. Even though you don't find him in the earlier tradition, you find him later on in Vajrayana. But it's a beautiful way of looking at the Buddha and the teachings. And that's going to be my link into the main topic of today, which are the Bojjhangas, which are the 7 factors of awakening. I was surprised some time ago when I came across, as I was reading the lives of the Buddha, lives of the Buddha's disciples and the life of the Buddha, to see the repetition of the Bojjhangas, the 7 factors of awakening, in certain aspects of their life, of the Sangha's life, where one would think, how is that even relevant? And then soon enough you were, you know, you really received your answer. The ones that I'm referring to are incidents where the Buddha himself was ill, his students were ill, and the Buddha went to each of those students. One of them was Ananda, the other one I believe was Mahakassapa. And one of the ways that the Buddha greeted his monks or nuns was, are you faring well? Basically, is everything okay? Are you doing okay? Are you getting your sustenance, daily sustenance? How's your health? Type of a thing. And when the student responded in, Master, I'm not feeling so well. And these were awakened monks and nuns. These were awakened. They were enlightened beings. They were arhats. that does not negate the fact that they still have to live in this body. They still feel pain. And this is where the love that the Buddha received, even as a 7-day-old little child, or later on, through most of his adult life, until he left the palace, from Mahapajapati, his aunt, who became his mom, basically, virtually, nursing mom, who took care of him like he was her own. That love, you still see it there, as a teacher going and asking his student, "How are you?" Sitting down with him. And as a remedy, this is where the interesting part came in for me. He said, "Listen carefully, O monk, for I will teach you the 7 factors of awakening." Now they already knew the 7 factors of awakening. They had been there present when he was reciting, when he was explaining it, the first, second, third time. However, there is a value there in reciting the 7 factors of awakening, which has this incredible protective quality to it. And the student usually, obviously, is going to open up and say, "Yes, master." So, and he would do a Q&A about each of these factors with the monk, with the ill monk. And in both cases, they were immediately healed just by the power. Now, in our 21st century, skeptical mind, we might say, how could reciting something could be that, transformative or healing? However, I tried it once too. I had a friend of mine recite it for me when I was really, really sick about a couple of years ago. I was having shivers, this and that. And that's where your faith comes in tremendously, and in your understanding of what it is that these 7 factors of awakening are really talking about. Now, this is the point where, I can relate as to why I chose this topic for today. The several topics preceding this dealt with the Satipatthana Sutta. The last one was about Dhammanupassana, where we started looking at the relationships between phenomena, experience, and the connection of those with the mind, and how the collectedness of mind, being aware of the relationships, could bring about a state of awakening. Now, when we say phenomena, we are also talking about the hindrances. Remember the 5 hindrances? First is kamachanda, which is sensual desire. Second one was ill will, vyapada. Third is tinhamida, which is sloth and torpor, drowsiness, sluggishness. The fourth one was restlessness and worry, uddhacca kukucca. And then finally is vicikicca, which is doubt. So as a remedy to these, and when a person is sick, by the way, most of the time we find all these 5 hindrances roaming around. And as a remedy, we have been given the 7 factors of awakening to be an answer to these 5 hindrances. So that's why I chose this topic for today. Just to remind you, refresh your memories about the 7 factors of awakening. First we have sati, which is mindfulness. Second we have dhamma vicaya, which is the curiosity, the investigation. Being curious about, what's going on here? Next comes virya, which oftentimes is translated as energy or perseverance or just that drive, that effort. Sometimes it's translated as effort, in fact. Next comes piti, which is joy. There's a few kinds of joy, and which I'll get into. And then comes the tranquility of mind, which is passaddhi. Next comes collectedness of mind or stillness of mind, which is samadhi. And finally we get to upekkha, which is equanimity. Interestingly enough, I was just going to get into the 7 factors, but then I just remembered the theme of the day and how a mother's embrace feels, how that tastes, what flavor does it have. And it has this sense of undiluted, complete sense of peacefulness, collectedness, a state of balance, security, calm, which in essence, if you think about the 7 factors of awakening, it is exactly what they render. It is exactly what they bring about. When we talk about equanimity, for example, it is that sense of balance that we feel secure within. And that's what I believe, in my own understanding, the Buddha was offering to his students who were ill. And later on, even himself, he was ill physically. And he asked his students to come and recite the 7 factors of enlightenment for him. And he became well, and he got up and started walking around when he was heavily sick prior to that. So in a sense, when a monk or a nun, or any of us, remaining members of the Sangha, upasakas and upasikas, but especially the monastics, when they put on the robe, when they go from home life to homelessness, they're, in a sense, in many ways actually, they're relinquishing, they're letting go of mom, their families, but especially that maternal, nourishing presence in their lives. But to something that they believe is greater, because that's the way that they're going to be able to cut through rebirth. At least that's how I look at it. And many monks and nuns possibly would agree with this. The Dhamma itself has the potential, based on our capacities, to grasp it as such, take it as such, for it to substitute our parents, the love of our parents. And sometimes I've heard or read in some books and lectures how Buddhism is such a selfish religion or whatever. And I look and I fail to see it. I fail to see their point. Because when you look at the Dhamma, and specifically the 7 factors of awakening, which is today's topic, you see that nourishing properties that it has. You see that assertiveness that it has. Something that we all talk about, that we want to make everyone assertive. I want to, which opens up another can of worms. Because today in today's society we talk about assertiveness, but what we're trying to say is selfishness. That's not what I use the word assertive when I refer it to the 7 factors of awakening. So it has this grounding quality as well. The Bojjhangas. Sapta Bojjhanga is the Pali word for it. The 7 factors of awakening. So, let's start breaking down the Bojjhanga itself. The 7 factors. So there's obviously 7 of them. And if you divide them, roughly they fall into 2 categories, 2 groups. One group has the quality of energizing. So it's a lot more active, driven, fueled, in a sense. And the other group is more of a calming nature. I know Jack Kornfield calls them passive. That group, he calls it passive, which I'm not a big fan of the word passive in this case. And then there's the balancing factor. So within the energizing group or grouping, we find virya, which is the effort or perseverance. We also find the Dhamma Vichaya, which is the investigative quality of mind, which needs to be there to maintain this sense of, okay, am I on my object of meditation? What's really going on here when you're in meditation? Because sometimes you're going to go into different types of thoughts, daydreaming and all that. Dhamma Vichaya is going to bring you back to the moment. What's happening? What's really going on? Oh, I have craving in my practice because I want to repeat my fun experiences I had in my last sitting. Well, that's going to be caught because of the spotlight of the Dhamma Vichaya. So it has this energized quality to it. It's investigative. Is it really what we're supposed to be doing at this moment, which is relaxing, relinquishing all desire of all sorts, and just being present, available? And then comes the third one, which is so virya, and then comes joy. Joy has this exuberant quality to it. It's overflowing. It's just like Old Faithful in Yellowstone. You know, it just bursts with energy. And in practice, in meditation practice, we've all experienced being sluggish. So the third of the hindrances, for example, tinhamida, which is drowsiness, sluggishness, sleepy, when that kicks in, we've all pretty much experienced this, I'm presuming, where you just want to okay, I just want to sleep. A meditator, if they just recall, if they just have that wish for experiencing joy at that moment, all of a sudden they're able to sit for another hour or so. In heavy meditation, in like long retreats, that's what meditators do. In that sense, 7 factors of awakening become your best teachers to support you. Because through practice, you see how they are directly addressing each of those hindrances. So we had virya, dhamma vichaya, energy or perseverance, investigation, and we had joy or rapture. Next group is the calming group. The calming group has to do with the mind finding itself being settled more and more and more. And the first of those is passaddhi, which is the calm or tranquility, calmness, tranquility of mind, which needs to come in first before samadhi really rests, before equanimity even comes in. So tranquility of mind, which basically is a state of mind that is not perturbed. See, when we're having sensual desire is not just necessarily sexual or bodily or whatever. It could be anything. It could be visual. You see something bright and you're like, oh, let me see what that is. It could be olfactory. Oh, wow. What is that? Oh, I'm passing by this lovely Italian pizza place. You know, come on, it's lunch almost. So tranquility of mind is a natural state of mind that does not have any of those hindrance factors, like the first hindrance, which was kamacchanda, which is sensual desire. So that's one of the reasons why it is a calming effect, which is a preparation of the ground for samadhi to come in, which is the next item on the list of calming factors. So samadhi is the next, which is a collectedness of mind, stillness of mind. And then finally, we get to equanimity as the last of the calming factors, which leaves us with number 1, which happens to be? Which one did I miss or not say? Exactly. Sati. Sati is the common denominator. Sati has to be there with all of these. Sati is the ground upon which we see everything else here laid out, all the furniture, including ourselves. Without sati, you cannot get into any of the jhanas, for example. Without sati, you cannot have wisdom. We cannot experience awakening. So sati is there. In fact, it's so important that sati is found in so many different categorizations that the Buddha laid out in his teaching. You also find them in the five faculties. You also find it turned into power. You also find it in the, among other things, you also find it in the 7 factors of awakening. So it must have been very important for the Buddha to include it in almost every formula or formulaic structure in his teachings. I am putting, it's pretty amazingly vast to talk about 7 factors of awakening, because they hit upon so many targets, so many elements of our lives, and especially of our meditation practice. In the suttas, and the way it came to me was when my teacher said, if you can only balance out the 7 factors, where they all are lined up perfectly with each other, that is a moment where Nibbana occurs. So when there isn't a predominance, for example, of joy, because joy, even though it's a beautiful state to be in, and it is one of the 7 factors of awakening, there are times when we need to lay off of it, back off of it, and go towards the collectedness of mind, go over towards the tranquility of mind, because too much joy is too fluttering, which takes away from the tranquility of mind. So there needs to be just enough of each of these factors where they become balanced. It's like a seesaw, some of my meditation friends used to say. It's like a seesaw. So when you have too much of a predominance in one, well, the other ones are going to be lacking. So you're going to be lopsided in your practice. In my own journey through the Brahma Viharas, one of the first things I told when I was doing my interview with him, I wanted to be so gung-ho about it because, it's my 10 days of meditation retreat. I'm going to give it all my energy, this and that. And he just looked at me. He's like, tone it down. Relax. You don't have to put that much effort. This is not the Marines or, that's not the attitude. So I was like, what? But for years I've been sitting, meditating, sweating on my meditation pillow, giving it my all. I was putting too much virya, too much of one of the factors in the energization group, because I was too, I was like top heavy in one of the factors, when I needed to just put in the right amount at the right time. If you've ever cooked something in the kitchen, too much salt is just going to mess up the whole dish. Too much of anything, or too little. Too much oil in a salad, it's inedible. So, if we are knowledgeable about these things, these factors again, in our own daily lives, when we look at our own pragmatic lives, normal lives, we have the wisdom, we have the understanding, clear-cut knowledge of, if you put too much salt, it's not going to work. Throw it away. It's a waste of time and energy and money. Why cannot we bring that attitude into our meditation practice? It's no different. And that's where meditation can become fun. Really. If you're laughing. It's in our attitude. Having the right view is so crucial out of the Eightfold Path. So when we approach the practice in such a stern, so serious way, we miss the whole point of balancing the 7 factors of awakening. Which, by the way, they don't necessarily have to come once one of them is completed and then you go to the next one, etc. They don't go in a linear fashion. And most things don't go in a linear fashion. That's what I'm discovering. dealing with my clients as a therapist, that's what I see all the time. When you look at the factors that cause them to get into this set of symptoms of depression, anxiety, frustration, anger, family discord. You know, in the old ways of thinking, we would just look at, okay, what happened, A and then B and then linear fashion. It doesn't exist in that way. There's so many things at play that it's in therapy now, we call it systemic. So many things, so many conditions. Even therapy is going towards Buddhism, by the way. They're looking at the conditionality of everything. And it doesn't go in a linear fashion. It's got so many elements to it. It's so causally brought forth. So when we look at our practice in that fashion, with the care and love of a mother towards ourselves, which is so lacking in meditators and in people. So many times I sit down with meditators or my clients in therapy, I just have to convince them that they are deserving of love. Wow! For some reason, somehow in our past, in our lives, we've convinced ourselves that, hey, everybody else might deserve love, but not me. Somehow we've convinced ourselves. When you dig deep enough, that's what's there. And that is going to be bringing us back to the first thing that was mentioned here, which is the mother's love. It's unconditional. At least it's supposed to be. I was reading something not too long ago where this woman wrote this beautiful phrase, and she said, if you're going to need to try hard and prove yourself worthy of love to receive it from your mother, there's something wrong with that. That's not motherly love. You know, today so many people are celebrating Mother's Day. And how many of us really are embodying that? That's another thing. Is there selflessness, which is a thing that today it's plaguing our humanity? We don't even know the word, or what the word means. We talk about empathy constantly. Oh, are you empathic? Are you this? Oh, I'm very empathic, or empathetic. And then you see the person's words, you hear the person's words, and you see their action, and it's shocking. You know, as Dhamma teachers, we're no different than any of the other careers, I would say, dealing with helping professions. Because in a sense, we are at the epitome of, because we work with the inside, with the mind, that influences everything else. And as Dhamma teachers, we look at the Dhamma for our motherly nourishment so we can actually share it. And there's so much of it necessary. And sometimes I see such begrudging ways of communication even within Dhamma circles, publications, where we're promoting this sense of selfishness. And I find that to be at odds with the spirit of motherly love. When I look at the Buddha, I see my mom, I see mother's love. When I read the Dhamma, I feel it. Especially when I sit down to practice. We're not going to have our moms forever. We're not going to have our fathers forever. We're not going to have our loved ones forever. You know, in Tibetan Buddhism, one of the practices crucial before you start your journey is called the Nyondro. Nyondro is basically 10,000 prostrations, 110,000 mandala offerings, etc. So it's a really long, arduous process. Usually takes, if you're diligent with it, it takes about 7 years to complete the whole thing. So one of the elements is parts of the practice is you visualize, I think it's either on the left or right side of you, the multitudes of moms and dads that you have come across, who've supported you, who took care of you in countless, limitless lifetimes. And whenever you're offering this mandala or you're doing guru practice, whatever, you have them share in these merits. And, you know, they're there because we're here. We are here because of the multitude of mothers that we have passed through the arms of, you know, who spent sleepless nights taking care of us. But how much of that nourishing, loving, motherly love are we bringing forth? First towards ourselves and secondly towards the world around us. The Buddha has said, I don't remember from which section of the Nikayas, but he's been reported to have said, a person who loves oneself cannot possibly have the desire to harm anyone. And when we look at the world that's so violent right now, it's so eager, it's like everybody's trying to jump on each other's throats. It's shocking because that means one thing. There's no love for oneself. So how much of the motherly love can we bring into our own lives, you know, towards ourselves and to our practice? Because that's going to emanate, manifest, radiate out towards everyone that we come across. And I think I've, yes.
Yes.
Okay, Monda's clearing his throat. Thank you for listening. But do we have time for a few questions or no?
If any question?